Welcome to The Mountain Pass, a podcast about lifelong learning, curiosity, and our wonderful brain. Topics we love at Alpe Audio. But this isn't a podcast about Alpe, the product. Rather, it's conversations driven by our curiosity. Today I'm sharing an interview with Maya Dolgin, the founder of BraverMe. I sat down a while ago with Maya to discuss her founding journey and what it took to make the brave step of leaving a tried and true career path to venture off on the entrepreneurial journey. We discussed what made her take the leap, her learnings, and what it takes to become a braver me. This conversation was in the context of Maya's course on Alpe Audio, Career Courage, a course that deals with how to take those critical steps in your career and find the inner courage to do so. Enjoy. Hi, Maya.
Hey, Yoshua. How are you?
I am good, Yoshua. For everyone listening to this last lesson of Career Courage, this is Yoshua from Alpe. And today, Maya and I actually wanted to do something a little bit different because throughout this entire course, and I will admit this is my idea, Maya was a little bit shy, but this is her form of Career Courage. But Maya has been teaching you about the fundamentals of career courage. And there's one story that's been left untold, and I thought it was really important to touch on, and that is Maya's story. Because Maya actually didn't start out as a solo entrepreneur, teacher, coacher, and all of the above. And actually her story involves a lot of career courage. And that's actually where I wanted to start off, Maya, because I think everyone who's listening to this course and has made it this far has a lot to learn, take away, and be inspired from your own personal story. So I thought as we start out, why don't you just tell us a little bit about BraverMe, what made you go there, and how you got to where you are?
Well, I wanted to start by thanking you, Yoshua, for inviting me to do this. It's an interesting way to end the course, to have the tables turned in such a way. And I am also glad to have a male voice in the course at some point. I think that it's good. I do want to say in that front for any male listeners that we've had that this is certainly, I hope that you have found that there is much in here that's universal and applicable across the board. And I think that it says something about the moment that we're in, that there's so much overlap in addition to the things that are particular to the experiences across genders. I am a communications and leadership coach. I founded BraverMe somewhere between 1.5 years and 2 years ago. There's always that time where you stop saying 1.5 years and you start to say 2 years. And I feel like it's like, like I'm saying like I'm 9.5. Like I feel like that.
I was thinking the same thing.
I just celebrated my 2-year anniversary of telling my last job that I was going down from full-time effective immediately, but I did give them 5 months of my time part-time while they found my replacement and I trained her up. So I'm not yet at my 2-year anniversary of doing this full-time. I'll get in a little bit to what that journey was like in between, but as a communications and leadership coach, I basically do 3 things. I do webinars and workshops, which are both group trainings, essentially for management and leadership teams, sometimes full organizations and professional development settings around topics of public speaking, interpersonal communications, and leadership training. And a lot of my one-on-one work is particularly with senior female leadership, women who are settling into a new position, a new leadership position, want to bring out the best in themselves and want to be able to shine essentially in their leadership positions by being able to sharpen their communication skills. I see a lot of overlap. If you were to imagine in your mind drawing a Venn diagram with 3 circles, one has the word communications in it, one has the word leadership in it, and one has the word gender in it. I sit there in the intersections between those 3 areas. So how I got there is a slightly roundabout story. Nothing in my life is like a straight shot, and yet it all comes together. I'm going to take you back to about 2017. I was just finishing up my MBA. I was working full-time in strategic partnerships at a think tank. You heard from Susie Pat Benveniste earlier in the course. She's the director general of the center where I worked and a mentor of mine. And I loved my job there, and I had grown in it. I had carved out a new function. I had been developing it out strategically. And I suddenly had a lot of time on my hands in the evenings because I wasn't going to school after work. And I started letting my mind kind of wander and see where it goes. And my mind wandered back to a recent experience where I had watched a female researcher absolutely refuse to go and be interviewed on TV on a study she had published. She published research and then didn't want to go talk about it in the news because she didn't want to be asked any questions she, God forbid, wouldn't know the answer to, be caught unprepared in any kind of way. And she just was arguing back to the director of communications who was trying to convince her to go get dressed and go to the studio. And she was refusing. And a male researcher who was not the author of that particular study said, "What's the problem? I'll go do it." And he read up on the topic. He already knew stuff about the topic. He wasn't a complete novice, but he wasn't the author of that study. And he went on the news and he got interviewed instead on the evening political commentary show. And I just thought, not on my watch. That cannot happen, to see the difference between two equally bright people, one of which is willing to put himself out there and one of whom is not interested in putting herself in any situation where she might not be fully prepared. I could see that there was so much underlying that. And the thought ran through my mind, if someone had just taken her when she was like a 15-year-old girl and taught her some public speaking skills and gave her some confidence that what she has to say is worthy of being heard by millions of people, then we wouldn't be in this situation right now. And that idea sparked in my mind that I was going to create a public speaking workshop for teenage girls. And it was going to be a nonprofit, and I was going to go back to my roots in education. And this was going to kind of bring together all of my interests in education and gender and communication skills and leadership training, which were things that I'd been doing before. And as it goes with ideas like this, I talked about it for a while until a friend said, "Stop talking about it. Let's do it. I'll help you."
A classic moment.
Classic moment. We were sitting, I will never forget it. We were sitting over, she invited me out for coffee to say, let's just do it already. We started to write up a program. We accidentally raised $5,000 in seed money, which then made me go into a panic because I was a fundraiser for a different organization. And I went and grovelly apologized to my boss and told her that I had this idea and that I was working on it. And, you know, if you want me to give back the check, I will. And she was like, "No, you don't have to give back the check. Just don't raise any more money for anything else that's not for us." And I deposited that seed money, and I said, well, I will use it when the time comes to actually get this thing off the ground. And I couldn't do it while I was working full time. The time I had spent writing papers and studying for tests in my MBA wasn't as easily replaced by actually going, you can't run an educational program at 7:00 at night for kids. It's not the same.
It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
They're not there. And so in the last lesson, in lesson 9, I briefly mentioned a story of what kind of caused me to decide that the time had come to really move on, which is that I had gotten a new manager above me, and she had started kind of very kindly and very graciously signaling to me that this was her show. And I understand it, and I wasn't upset with her, but I understood that the time had come for me to start to pick up the pace on making my next moves. I had started to be recruited for a higher level position in my field at another organization, and I made it to the finalists round. And then I pulled myself out because my heart just really knew that this was not the career that I wanted. And I knew that I wanted to be my own boss, and I wanted to create something that was mine. And so I told them in January 2019 that I was leaving. I was going to start a public speaking program for teenage girls, and everyone was very enthusiastic and cheering me on and said, stay as long as you can stay and do whatever you need to do. And the next day I began 3 days a week work there and spend 2 days a week during daytime hours actually creating this program and doing my market research that I learned in my MBA I should have been doing the whole time, because as soon as I started doing market research, I came to understand two very important things, which was one, that there was a lot of enthusiasm for my idea, but no one could really point me in the direction of the funding for it. And I was starting to really understand that 1 + 1 was not adding up, that there was a gap between enthusiasm and the ability for me to translate it quickly into action. The $5,000 I had raised in seed money was a mirage of something bigger to come.
In the sense of just a market
No,
need, or being able to actually develop a business around it?
The funding model specifically, there were two problems. One was that schools, youth groups, summer camps, they wouldn't be able to necessarily afford to pay me. They didn't have the budgets available to pay me what I thought would be a reasonable price for my time. And the foundations, it would seem to fall through the cracks of the women's foundations on the one hand, educational foundations on the other hand. Programming for girls specifically seemed to just not have the kind of steady grant money out there that this was my analysis at the time, because the reason I decided to quickly make a shift was because in parallel from those same people who were giving me that feedback, I was getting other feedback, which was, but if you have a program for adults like me, I would totally sign up.
So I mean, what I'm hearing from the story is really interesting in the sense of there was an aha moment, which was uniquely, courage related, right? Your colleague, the researcher who didn't want to, go on TV, but it was also completely gender related, right? And that kind of inspired you to come up with that, the first business thesis model or problem to be solved.
Right.
And so there was this aha moment, but then, I think I can definitely sympathize with this, as you have this great idea and then you just sit on your hands and kind of do nothing and continue with the status quo until your friend kind of gave you this, this kick in the behind to kind of go ahead and take the leap, quote unquote.
Yes.
And then you did it, and in a way kind of fell flat on your face, which is again something I've definitely fallen flat on your face. I don't know if that was your experience there, but kind of what was that feeling like when you encountered the market and, you had said this publicly to everyone and all of a sudden the market doesn't really fit what you had in mind? And then what is that shift that you do?
Yeah. I think that those 5 months between when I declared that I was leaving to create a nonprofit for teenage girls and actually my last day of work, where I knew that I was going to be coaching adults and senior executives, is like very, very far away. I will say that the decision, just to wrap up kind of what I decided the model would be, was that it would be a social business, and that the decision that my business model didn't need to rest on programming for teenagers, but that if I am making enough money doing work in the corporate world and in nonprofits and with private clients and whatever, then I can choose always to give back to teenagers as much as I want, whenever I want, and not have to worry about making money off of that. And so that's something that's kind of stayed a core of my work, is that I ran a program for 7th grade girls on TED Talks and, and other similar things like that. I did a program for teenagers who are youth at risk, who through the program got the opportunity to get a summer job, their first job, these teenagers. And I did a program for them on how to communicate with your boss. Those were things that I could decide that I'm going to do and not take payment for, to take very discounted payments for, because I had a strong enough leg from a business perspective to be able to rest on. So that's important for me to say, because the values underlying what I'm doing remain the same. But back to the question of within those 5 months, when I started telling people that I was doing X, and by the time I left them, I had decided to do Y, there was a bit of shame in there. Like, there's something about declaring that I'm going to be the savior of teenage girls with the whatever comes along with that, and then shifting pretty quickly to saying, actually, I'm going to go work with well-paid adults instead, was something that I needed to kind of come to terms with the fact that everyone has something that they're striving for. And that my gift is almost unrelated to the context in which I'm working, which is that I bring out the best in people. I make people feel like they can do anything. That's something that I've always felt since I was a little girl, and love seeing other people succeed, love seeing people recognize their powers and their strengths. So I was able to kind of overcome my own mental blocks that I'd put in the way of, well, now I need to go back to those people and tell them it's actually not a nonprofit, it's actually a thing. And then, it's like, well, actually they're going to be happy for you either way, because you're still going to be offering value that's going to make the world a better place this way or that way. And who knows when and how these things will end up circling back to become opportunities or partnerships in the future with those people. And just to know that it was all resting on a lot of mutual respect and appreciation for the working relationships that we had at the time.
Right. So what's amazing about this to me is, you or someone could be thinking about this kind of from a negative point of view, which is, oh, you're selling out your vision and you wanted to go help people, but instead, you're selling out to the man. But really, what you're doing here is also in a way a kind of reframing, which I know is a topic that you touched on in one of the lessons as well.
Absolutely.
Which is, we're looking at this actually from the positive point of view, and this is empowering, your core vision, which has never disappeared, right? It's just this is a way to get there.
Yes, absolutely. I think that reframing is one of the things that it helps me keep a positive mindset at every step along the way. Is to constantly be, one of my mantras really is, what's my opportunity here? What's my opportunity here? What can I learn? What can I learn?
Right.
That constantly asking myself those questions, constantly telling myself that there is something that I can be learning from any situation that I'm in, allows me to, it really puts wind in my sails.
Yeah. So you decide to kind of get the wind in your sails and go ahead, take the leap, go for it. And kind of the question that comes to my mind is, you're doing that market research, and then, what comes next? You've done your market research, this is the direction you have to go, right? So how do you prepare for that shift? And I'm asking this in the sense of, when people think about entrepreneurs, there's this common tendency, this myth really, that entrepreneurs are these incredible risk takers, right? Living on the edge and leaving the safe corporate job. And in a way that's true, but usually what I've seen with entrepreneurs, and I've definitely felt this about myself when it comes to Alpe, is that you're not actually a risk taker, you are a risk mitigator. Because every day, there's just so few resources that you have at your disposal, right? You have X amount of hours, you have X amount of energy, and you have to kind of think about, what do I do with that time, with those resources that I have? And so, I found that entrepreneurs are great at mitigating a risky bet, because it's just part of the mindset. And so, how did you prepare from that kind of point of view?
It's an excellent question. I think that the first thing that comes to mind actually is that the biggest risk of being an entrepreneur is, and the biggest risk of leaving a full-time job, is not having salary anymore.
It's a big risk.
It's a big risk. It is not something to be taken lightly. You need to know what your sources of income are. How are you paying rent? For me, I had been working for 9 years already and had not made any big purchases. I had been socking away all my savings and always lived with roommates and didn't own a car and traveled by public transportation, I hadn't bought an apartment. I hadn't, anything. I had just been saving my money. And I kind of set a goal for myself in terms of my savings in my bank account of, when I reach X, I can quit my job, because it'll give me enough of a buffer to, I can spend X percentage of that on myself and my living expenses for a little while I'm making those first deals and finding my first clients. And that was one part of it. And another, so was that I had savings. I had worked for that money, and this was how I was choosing to spend that money. Instead of buying a car or buying an apartment or something, I put it into just to allow myself to live for a little while. And the second part of it is that I got a side gig that covered my rent. Essentially, it took me a few months. I left my job in May, and that only started in September. But then for the next year, I made enough money from my 10 hours a week of doing something that was unrelated to my business that allowed me to just cover the rent and the bills. And so I was, in that sense, whatever I needed to. It allowed me to be discerning in the choices I was making on the business front, because it wasn't that I needed every dollar that people were offering me for anything, even if it wasn't in my vision. So in that sense, I do feel like that was a really big thing, was to be able to make sure that I was covering my bases. And then there's kind of the other side of it, which is starting to actually do the work that I say that I'm going to do.
Minor part.
What?
Minor. It's a minor part.
It's a minor part actually of doing this. I had it too. I kind of believe in karma, and I put a lot of goodness out there into the world, and I accept the goodness that comes back in my direction. And within that time from January to May, 2 people who I knew who did not know that I was on this journey kind of reached out with requests to work together exactly on the things that I was thinking at the time of focusing on. One was an Israeli woman who I knew, who was experiencing a shift at work where she was suddenly needing to speak more in English in meetings. And she was finding that her confidence was plummeting and she couldn't get a sentence out, and she was stammering and she was going red in the face, and she wanted to see if I had any ideas about this. And so she was someone who I could start working with right away and just say, hey, I don't think I even took any money from her. I just wanted to practice. So that was one, is that I did a few sessions with her really just to test it out and to see what it would be like to do the stuff that I'd been doing in-house at the Taub Center informally for years now, but let's see how it works when I'm doing it in this kind of a context. And the second was with a friend who I hadn't spoken to in years, who posted in a Facebook group that I was also in saying, hey, I'm a programmer and I'm applying for a job at Google and I'm super nervous about the interview process. Does anyone have any suggestions? And I wrote to her and said, hey, I'm happy to help. And we actually met consistently for a few weeks. And I learned everything I could about the Google hiring process in those few weeks. And we did practice interviews, and we went over some basic questions and talked through some of her questions about her confidence. And she made it pretty far in the hiring process at Google. And in the meantime, got a job offer at a different tech company and was super stoked about that, and ended up taking this other job, and was just incredibly appreciative for my help through that process. And it just felt great. It was like, okay, this I can do. I can work with women like this. And it gave me the boost to be able to go out and start to tell people, like, this is what I'm doing. These are the kinds of people I'm working with. There is an element of fake it till you make it, right? There is an element to this of needing to kind of say things in a tone as if I've done it a million times. That's something that I took from my work in fundraising. The first time I ever asked anyone, the first time I solicited someone for a gift was a billionaire who is, I don't know if he's a name that other people know, but he was the chair of a company that we all know. And I needed to sit with him and have the words come out of my mouth as if I'd said them 100 times, which meant I needed to practice them 100 times. And I said them in the mirror and I said them out loud in the car. And so that when I sat down in front of him, it wouldn't sound like, oh my God, you're the first person I'm ever asking for money in this capacity. And that was a really important lesson from early in my career in that fake it till you make it. Is it's not actually just about faking it. It's like about doing a lot of practice, practicing until it looks like you've done it a million times. And so by the time the summer came around and I was sitting down and talking to people and looking for clients, and I just wanted to sound like an expert already. I wanted to sound like I was seasoned in this, and also bring the young and the fresh and the new perspective and keep that with me. I couldn't pretend I'd been doing this for 100 million years already, but someone new on the scene who's asking questions that no one's asked before or offering perspectives that no one's offered before, there is value to that within an ecosystem.
Right. So I'm hearing 2 main things, and they're both really poignant also in my experience building Alpe. And the first one is, you have to give yourself the opportunity to succeed. And the opportunity to succeed usually just requires more time than what we think. And the way to do that is, you saved up in advance, which was number one. And number 2 is sometimes you can't go completely full time. You have to pay the rent. And there's always a side gig that you can do, because at the end of the day, we all have to pay rent. And it takes time to build something meaningful, something that makes an impact. And that's probably the most important factor to a lot of people's success, right? No one's been an overnight success on YouTube. I think I just heard that the most watched YouTuber a week or two ago kind of hit 50 million subscribers. And the first year or 2 years, he ended with 100 and something subscribers. So after 100 and something videos, he only had 100 subscribers. And this is kind of mind blowing, right? That it takes that long. And it sounds like you really gave yourself that opportunity with proper thought. And so that was one big part of it. The second part is all about, practice makes perfect, fake it till you make it, right? Which is, once you've given yourself that opportunity, it does require a lot of work and a lot of preparation to make sure that you capitalize on it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the ability to let things sink in and to recognize that you're not going to be an overnight success is crucial, because there's a level of impatience in all entrepreneurs. I used to say, and I catch myself, I've stopped saying it to just be kinder to myself, but I would just say, I just want to be there already. I just want to be there already. And it's like, where is there, right? Success is not a destination. Success is a mindset. And it involves compassion, self-compassion, because there's not a moment at which I would say, yes, there I am, right? I've had wonderful moments over these years. I organized an event that had 300, 400 signups for a space that could only hold 100 people. And it was a high quality program, and it drew interest from within the room. And those kinds of things, they give energy and they kind of recharge for continuing on through all the other dark days in between, with a constant reminder to ourselves that we are enough, right? But there's this impatience in entrepreneurs. I don't know if you feel this, of seeing the vision, wanting to get there. But I think it's a Stephen Covey-ism I've referenced many times, with all kinds of like nuggets that have stuck in my head from reading his book over and over again, that you can't plant a seed the day before you expect to harvest what's grown. Right? Like,
I've definitely felt that.
There is no shortcut to planting the seeds and watering and tilling and waiting and letting the weather and the climate do its work and seeing the fruits of your labor. Like, it just takes time. And that is something that we as entrepreneurs must take into consideration and must be willing to be kind to ourselves during all of the waiting. This connects back to lesson 2 on the job search and the lesson on overcoming failure, right? All of these places in this course where we've talked about keeping ourselves, having a positive mindset. Anyone who's listening must go read Carol Dweck's Mindset. It's really that I think the growth mindset is probably one of the most important things I've adopted over the last 2 years, and it just keeps me going all the time.
So what do those dark days look like, right? When you wake up in the morning, you don't feel like doing anything except for curling back up under the bed or reading a good book.
Yeah, I find that the perfectionist paralysis, aka procrastination, has very, very tricky ways of manifesting. This is not an answer to your original question, but just to say for a second on the curling up and reading a good book, I find all kinds of things that seem to me like they are productive and important uses of my time, but are actually just avoidances from actually getting to the stuff that is going to be hard, but that I actually really need to do. I will find myself cleaning up documents that, or it's like, well, I needed to fix that Excel. It was like, well, actually, you didn't really need to fix that Excel, but it made you feel like you were doing something while you were, so that happens on dark days. If I find myself on a task, if I find myself suddenly feeling the need to review again the language on my website and see if there are any places where I should tweak a word or two, and just kind of reading, that's when I know that there's something else more important that I'm supposed to be doing in that moment, because I know that the landing pages on my website are not drawing enough traffic to be more important than writing the proposal for the really, really big pitch that I'm putting together, which feels super daunting and then gets pushed off instead of just sitting down and doing it. That for me is a big part of it, is the dark days getting filled up with tasks that are not the core, that are not the most important things for me to be working on. The dark days could start with a very leisurely morning of exercising and writing in my journal and making a nice breakfast, and it's 10:30 and I haven't actually sat down to do anything. I will pause and ask myself, what am I avoiding? Right? Because there's always something to do. I mean, there's no reason on a normal day for me at 10:30 to not have started working yet, unless I have something planned that's going till late at night or the night before I was up. I've given webinars at 2 a.m. before, and okay, fine. It's okay to still be getting myself ready at 10:30. But on most normal days, I want to have a normal schedule. And then kind of recognizing that it's sitting on some self-doubt in the moment, that what I'm doing is not good enough, that people aren't happy, that people haven't gotten back to me with proposals that I've sent out. That means that they must not like it. And I think that the work that I do with my clients, when I hear these things being said out loud by other people, and my job is to be helping them in the moment, it does wonders for me helping myself. I just spoke before to someone who I worked with, and we finished up a few months ago together. And I told her, I just wanted her to know that something that she was struggling with, I was feeling as well. And I've since managed to kind of push through it. And I just wanted to thank her for, she didn't even know that she was having a positive effect on me, but I wanted to thank her anyway for that. There's so much in my work that requires me to always be bringing the best of myself if I'm expecting myself to be able to bring out the best in others, which helps me snap out of it pretty quickly when I'm feeling down.
So a lot of self-compassion. And so self-awareness. Yeah.
So much. Yeah. Yeah.
So kind of just to wrap up, as people finish off, this is the 10th lesson. What kind of, last advice that you still have not touched on would you care to, let people take away with?
That's such a great question. Last advice. Well, first of all, I want to thank all of the listeners, all of the students of this course who I would love to hear from you. I would love feedback. I would love to know what has touched you. What do you think I could improve on? Please send it all my way, maya@braverme.today. What last advice do I have? Know your core. Just know your core. Know what's in your heart, what makes you who you are, what can never be questioned by others, the things about you that make you a valuable, what are the things that you value in yourself? And write them big, keep them somewhere very prominent, and don't ever forget what those things are, because that's what helps you. That's what helps me stay steady, to not be overly excited by the amazing stuff that happens. And it's really good to celebrate the amazing stuff, but also to not let the disappointing moments shake me, is really just knowing at my core that I am worthy, that I am enough, that I bring value to my loved ones, to my clients, to all of you, and to just believe in that, truly, truly to believe in that, which I do. And I hope that you all do as well. And once you have that, a sense of what are your values, a sense of what are your strengths, a sense of what are your passions, then it makes it much easier to take risks in other places.
Wow. That's I think, the best way to wrap this up. So Maya, thank you so much for the time. This was great. I'm glad we got the chance to do this and share this with everyone. Thank you so much
for the opportunity and for hosting this course and giving me the opportunity. And I'm glad that we've created this together.
Great. So let's go ahead and take the leap.
Take the leap, everyone.